I've been asked to speak about opportunities and obstacles of regional integration. But first of all, and I have a few points to make in favor of greater integration, but first of all, I'd like to stress that, of course, ASEAN was never designed or intended as a regional integration project. As Ambassador Keng Yong was saying, it's a supranational organization. It's in fact a sovereignty upholding and reinforcing project, not an integration project. ASEAN, Southeast Asia, is a sum of its parts, and virulent sovereignty prevails. The Treaty of Westphalia is alive and well in this part of the world. It's also, by the way, alive and well in Spain today, as we see, because none of the other EU states has said a word about what was happening in Madrid yesterday. There are, of course, historical as well as geographical reasons for this. And it's worth remembering historically that state formation in Southeast Asia occurred separately and under different circumstances. There are latent border disputes and conflicts arising from this state formation in the last century that still lurk, Sabah, southern Thailand, being two in question. And lastly, the mainly Buddhist mainland region of Southeast Asia and the mainly Muslim island region of Southeast Asia are an awkward fit. In terms of integration projects, I think I'd like to just draw your attention to a contrasting example, which is oddly enough not in the EU, but ECOWAS in West Africa. ECOWAS is a 15-member state regional association established only in 1975. Its vision is as follows. The vision of ECOWAS is the creation of a borderless region where the population has access to its abundant resources and is able to exploit the same through the creation of opportunities under a sustainable environment. What ECOWAS has created is an integrated region where the population enjoys free movement, have access to efficient education and health systems, and engage in economic and commercial activities while living in dignity in an atmosphere of peace and security. ECOWAS is meant to be a region governed in accordance with the principles of democracy, rule of law, and good governance. It sounds very nice, doesn't it? Integration lies at the core of this vision. And going much further, I was told just the other week when I was in Africa that the president of Togo may seek re-election beyond the 2 terms that he's allowed, and he will be removed by other ECOWAS member states. And this is increasingly the trend in West Africa, that other states will intervene in order to prevent political instability and conflict. By contrast, ASEAN's aim is to accelerate the economic growth, social progress, and cultural development in the region through joint endeavors in the spirit of equality and partnership, in order to strengthen the foundation for a prosperous and peaceful community of Southeast Asian nations. That doesn't sound like integration, and it isn't supposed to be. But there are opportunities for greater economic integration, obviously. Certainly it makes sense, economic sense to a degree. And I'm not an economist, but when you have a market of more than 620 million people, mostly enjoying an average growth rate of 6% per annum, you would think there should be access to tariff-free goods within the region, the free movement of labor, and the ability to benefit from industrial economies of scale. Yet although an ASEAN economic community has been declared, very little real economic or financial integration has occurred. And I think the main reason for this is that there are selfish governing elites in bed with corporate cronies who still view protection of markets and unfair economic practices as the best way to generate wealth. My next point is that, of course, greater integration does, however, make sense from a social and political perspective. For with the greater transnational threats that the region faces, it is best to cooperate and integrate actions more closely than before. Marawi is Exhibit A, and Rakhine State is Exhibit B. Both are manifestly the internal affairs of the countries in which they happened, in the Philippines and in Myanmar. Yet they can also be considered impactful on the neighborhood. In the case of Marawi, the Philippines government swiftly recognized the need for help from neighboring ASEAN member states. A trilateral cooperation agreement was negotiated between Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. But here, the lack of integration is vividly portrayed as joint security cooperation is hamstrung by sizable differences in legal, administrative, and capacity terms. In the case of Rakhine State, the government of Myanmar has blocked all efforts by ASEAN member states to offer help and assistance. Indonesian Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi visited Naypyidaw in early September, shortly after the crisis erupted. She said that she was going on behalf of ASEAN, but she was firmly told that all aid and assistance would have to be channeled through the Red Cross, and offers to engage through the ASEAN Center for Humanitarian Assistance have been resisted. Myanmar's refusal to accept help from its ASEAN neighbors has angered some member states, especially Malaysia, which is now calling for Myanmar to be expelled from the association. At a foreign ministers' meeting, an ASEAN foreign ministers' meeting held on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly just last month in New York, Malaysia's foreign minister angrily stormed out and disassociated his country from the chairman's statement on Rakhine, a highly divisive move. As a result, ASEAN is now divided and presents a weak face to the world in its 50th year, in my view. Finally, my last point would be that a more integrated approach to the management of cooperative security has never been more important as ASEAN faces a rising China. The South China Sea issue has divided ASEAN and revealed a weak framework for cooperative security. Having worked on this issue now in the quest for measures to prevent incidents at sea, I can testify to the absence of any real jointedness between naval and maritime law enforcement across the region. Given that there is now less space, as Ambassador Keng Yong was saying, in terms of geopolitical terms, it is important for ASEAN to cast a longer shadow, to make itself seem bigger in the world. But this is proving to be very difficult. The main obstacle to the great integration on the economic and social and security fronts in ASEAN is, of course, ASEAN's bedrock principle of non-interference. Arguably, non-interference has served the region very well. It has kept many of the internal conflicts that afflict Southeast Asia from sparking wider interregional conflict, though it has not stopped neighboring countries from covertly meddling across each other's borders. But as the external forces fueling these conflicts become more menacing, and as they generate communal tensions affecting the wider region, I believe this builds a case for exceptionalism. There must, I think, in some instances, be situations where ASEAN member states agree to set aside the non-interference principle and work together in a more integrated fashion to address threats to common security. Primarily, these are threats to pluralism, to ethnic and religious tolerance. They're posed by the crisis in Marawi and Rakhine State. And both these situations make the case very plain. But ASEAN has so far failed to rise to the challenge. Thank you.